A fisherman mocked the Virgin Mary at sea, and then he drowned. The water was not a gentle cradle. It was a fist of ice, closing around his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. There was no light, only the pressing weight of the North Atlantic and the roar of the storm turning into a deep, final silence. His name was Manny Silva, and he was a fisherman out of Gloucester, Massachusetts. He worked from a 30-foot trawler named the Catarina, and the boat was as tired as he was. Streaks of rust bled from the scuppers down the white hull, like tears that had long since dried. On the deck, the nets were mended with mismatched twine, and the winch groaned with the sound of metal fatigue. The air inside the cabin was thick with the smell of old diesel, stale coffee, and something else, something like the scent of a room that had been sealed for years. Manny moved through this space with a heavy, deliberate slowness, his shoulders rounded under a faded flannel shirt. His hands, though calloused and strong from a lifetime of hauling gear, never seemed to rest. They were always coiling a stray rope, wiping a clean surface, or gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles showed white against the dark wood. He did not look at the sky or the gulls that followed his wake. He looked at his deck, at his hands, at the gray water churning at the stern. He worked from the docks of Gloucester Harbor, a place of constant motion, but Manny himself seemed caught in a deep and silent stillness. The stillness had begun 3 years earlier, in a quiet room at Addison Gilbert Hospital overlooking the harbor. His wife, Catarina, had been small in the starched white bed, her breath a shallow tide. For months, he had spent every moment he wasn't at sea in the pews of Our Lady of Good Voyage Church on Prospect Street. He would stare at the famous statue above the entrance, the Virgin Mary holding a schooner in her arms, a silent promise of protection for the men who went to sea. He didn't just pray, he bargained. He promised every fish he would ever catch, the boat itself, his own 2 hands. He promised a faith so loud it would shake the granite walls of the old church. The answer he received was the steady, rhythmic beep of a machine flatlining in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. He walked out of the hospital, leaving Catarina's wedding band on the nightstand because his hands had swollen with work and grief, and it no longer fit. He went home to a house that smelled of her lavender soap and the antiseptic cleaner the hospice nurse had used. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the stack of medical bills, thin as paper but heavier than any anchor he had ever lifted. He never went back inside the church. The storm came up from the southeast, a bruised knuckle fist of a squall that was not in the morning's forecast. By 4:17 p.m., the sky was the color of slate and the sea was a chaos of steep gray waves. The Catarina pitched violently, the deck awash in freezing spray. Manny fought the wheel, his face slick with salt and rain, the muscles in his back and shoulders burning. He could just make out the twin lights of the Thatcher Island lighthouses, a desperate pinprick of home. He saw the distant spire of Our Lady of Good Voyage Church, a needle against the dark sky. A wave of something hot and hard rose in his chest. He let go of the wheel with one hand, leaned out the cabin door into the screaming wind, and yelled at the shore. He yelled at the spire, at the statue he could not see but knew was there, holding her little boat. He yelled a string of curses, sharp and bitter, mocking the silent stone and the empty promises he felt it represented. As the last word was torn from his lips, a rogue wave, a wall of black water, slammed into the Catarina's beam. The world became a violent, churning confusion of splintering wood and roaring water. He was in the sea before he even knew the boat was gone. The shock of the cold was absolute. The distress call from the Catarina was a half-second burst of static before it cut out, but it was enough. The signal was logged at the Coast Guard Station Gloucester, and a cutter was dispatched into the teeth of the storm. On the docks, the news traveled faster than the wind. Men in oilskins stopped their work, their faces grim, looking out towards the harbor mouth, where the waves crashed over the breakwater. In a coffee shop on Main Street, the low murmur of conversation stopped. A waitress paused, a pot of coffee in her hand, as 2 old fishermen by the window spoke Manny's name. Everyone knew the Catarina. Everyone knew Manny had not been the same since his wife died. They knew about the silence that had grown around him, a space no one dared to cross. A man dropped his keys, the metallic clatter loud in the sudden hush. He was drowning. The fight was short, a frantic animal thrashing that served only to pull him under. The cold was no longer a sensation on his skin. It was inside his bones, a deep, final chill that slowed his heart. His lungs burned for air, a fire in his chest that the water could not extinguish. He stopped fighting. As his body grew limp, surrendered to the pull of the deep, the chaos of the storm receded. There was only pressure and darkness. He saw not a life flashing before his eyes, but a single clear image. Catarina's face, not as she was in the hospital bed, but as she was on their wedding day, on the steps of Our Lady of Good Voyage. The memory was so clear it hurt more than the water in his lungs. He felt his last breath leaving him, a stream of silver bubbles rising into the black, and with that last bit of air, a single soundless word formed in his mind, a whisper aimed at the memory, at the church, at the entire indifferent sky. Mary. Then, there was nothing. The roar of the storm was gone. In its place was a silence so profound it was a presence, a weightless peace that held him suspended in the black. The crushing cold in his limbs eased, replaced by a gentle, impossible warmth. Below him, a light began to glow, not the harsh white of a searchlight, but a soft, luminous blue, the color of a twilight sky in summer. It grew, pushing back the darkness, illuminating the swirling particles of sand and sea. The light did not sting his eyes. It soothed them. It rose up and enveloped him, and with it came a scent that did not belong in the middle of the ocean. It was not the brine of the sea or the iron tang of his own blood. It was the rich, sweet fragrance of 1,000 roses blooming in the heart of the cold Atlantic. He felt a presence lifting him, not with hands, but like a current, a gentle and insistent force pushing him upward, toward the churning surface. On shore, a woman walking her dog along Stacy Boulevard, her head bowed against the wind, stopped. She saw it far out at sea, a pulsing blue glow where no boat could be. At that same moment, the bells of Our Lady of Good Voyage Church tolled once, a single, resonant note that carried clearly over the wind, though it was not the top of the hour. The crew of the Coast Guard cutter found him an hour later, impossibly, clinging to the splintered wreckage of the Catarina's wheelhouse. He was unresponsive, his skin the color of ash, but he was breathing. At Addison Gilbert Hospital, the same hospital where his wife had died, he lay wrapped in thermal blankets, machines beeping softly around him. When he woke, the first thing he saw was a small plastic crucifix screwed to the wall. He stared at it for a long time. He did not speak to the nurses or the doctor. When his strength returned, he pulled the IV from his arm, dressed himself in the clothes they had dried for him, and walked out of the hospital. He did not go to his boat or to his empty house. He walked steadily, his steps still unsteady, up the hill to Our Lady of Good Voyage Church on Prospect Street. The doors were unlocked. He walked down the silent nave, his sea boots echoing on the stone floor, and stopped before the statue. He looked up at her face, at the small, perfect schooner she held cradled in her arms. He did not speak. He slid to his knees, the impact sharp against the cold marble, and covered his face with his hands. The story of Manny Silva's return from the sea spread through Gloucester not like a fire, but like a slow, rising tide. It changed things in small, quiet ways. The next morning, when Manny went down to the docks to survey the wreckage of his life, he found a new thermos full of hot, sweet coffee sitting on a piling where he used to tie up the Catarina. An old fisherman, a man he'd had a bitter argument with just a week before, nodded to him from across the water, a simple gesture that erased a year of bad blood. A few days later, a group of teenagers who usually spent their afternoons smoking by the harbor instead gathered at the small park beside Our Lady of Good Voyage, quietly picking up wind-blown trash. At the Coast Guard station, the young petty officer who had been the first to spot Manny in the water found himself sitting in a back pew at Sunday Mass. Not sure why he was there, only that he felt he needed to be. A silent understanding settled over the waterfront. No one asked Manny what happened. They just watched him. Manny did not become a preacher. He did not stand on the docks and tell his story to all who would listen. He became quieter than ever, but his silence was different. It was no longer the heavy, isolating silence of grief, but the peaceful, attentive silence of a man who is listening. He worked for months, alongside other fishermen who offered their help, to salvage and rebuild the Catarina. The new hull was clean, the rust gone. The nets were mended with careful, even stitches. He went back to the sea, but now, before he left the harbor, he would stop his boat for a moment, look up at the church on the hill, and nod. He spent his early mornings in the church, not kneeling, but sitting in the front pew, simply being present. One winter evening, a young family, newly arrived in Gloucester and struggling to make ends meet, opened their front door to find a large wooden crate on their steps. It was full of fresh-caught haddock and cod, packed in ice. They never learned who left it, but an old Portuguese woman who lived next door saw Manny's truck pull away just as dusk was settling. She later told them, with a small smile, "That's just Manny's way now." Sometimes mercy does not arrive as a soft voice or a gentle hand. It comes as a wall of black water that breaks you apart, that pulls you down into a silence deeper than the sea. It finds you in the suffocating dark, not when you are praying for it, but when you have cursed its very name. It is a rescue you did not ask for and do not believe you deserve. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe to E, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us your moment of unexpected grace in the comments.